Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, it's great to be back in Appleton, one of our favorite places. Of all the places I've been, I've done over 500 conferences and missions over the years, and Appleton ranks at the very top in terms of the response that we've gotten over the years, and so we're very happy to be here. We're going to do a new series, so you're going to become famous. You'll be on television. It's going to be an interesting topic, I think. We'll see how it comes out. Something I haven't done before. The topic is familiar to me, but I haven't done exactly this before. It's 21st century spiritual survival, based on a few books I have here. One's the Bible. One is Field Manual 21-76, the United States Army Survival Manual. And the other one, the Special Forces Handbook. You know, Jesus used parables, analogies, metaphors to teach. He took examples from the natural order to point us to things above nature. And that's a very good way to teach because people understand it. So we're going to do that. We're going to take examples that we can understand from the natural order, everyday life. In this case, survival. And if you think survival today, spiritual survival, moral survival, if you think that's not a relevant topic, well, just tune in the 6 o'clock news tonight, and you may become convinced. These are not ordinary times. These are extraordinary times. And survival is something you better think about for yourself, your family, your friends. You know, the military talks about survival in a physical sense, surviving when you're behind enemy lines, faced with hostile forces. Well, let me clue you in. You are behind enemy lines, whether you know it or not, whether you believe it or not, whether you like it or not. You are behind enemy lines. And you have to know how to survive in that kind of a situation. This is a hostile environment for religion, for virtue, for the practice of our faith. Oh, it may not be hostile in the sense of outright physical persecution, but if you stand fast in your faith today, publicly, if you speak your mind, if you don't buckle at the knees, get weak in the spine, and wimp out, you'll be persecuted. The world will let you know that your views are antiquated, not wanted. Now, you're in a hostile environment, all right, and you've got to know how to survive. And so we're going to present 4 talks on spiritual survival in the 21st century. And as I said, we'll use analogies from the natural order. And someone asked me, they always ask me, what are the titles of the talks, you know, for advertising and so forth. So they're very creative this time. It's called Spiritual Survival Part 1, Spiritual Survival Part 2, Part 3, and Part 4. Later, after you and I both find out what's going to be in those talks, we might be able to name them with something more descriptive. I basically know what I'm going to say when I do this, but not totally. You know, I don't write it out and read it. I have some notes. I have a framework. I know roughly what I want to cover. But exactly how that comes out, I don't know that. You know, the Holy Spirit knows that. And, you know, I show up, you showed up, and we better hope the Holy Spirit shows up. Because if he doesn't, we're both in big trouble. But I know he will, because he always does. This four-part presentation, I hope, will equip you, help to equip you, to fight the good fight and run the race to the finish line. Just like when you're in the military. You know, in the military, you get sent on a mission. You know, your mission might be gather intelligence, take out the bridge, do this, do that. You have a mission. Our mission is very clear. We don't have to guess about that. Our mission is the mission of the Redeemer. Jesus, the Redeemer. What is the mission of the Redeemer? Redemption. Imagine that. The servant, that's us, is no better than his master. What's our mission? Redemption. The salvation of souls. Yes, you have to save your soul, but not only your soul. Every one of us shares in our baptism, we share in the mission of Christ, which is redemption. So we're sent on a mission in a hostile environment. The world, the prince of this world, Jesus calls him. He's the prince of this world. This world, that's the battlefield. The prince of this world, the devil. Now, I don't have time, because I always have limited time. You know, I come in, I do what I've got to do, in a few hours I get out. I don't have time to argue about things the Catholic Church formally teaches. There are people in the Catholic Church even who they don't really understand, or they don't accept what the church teaches. One thing when the hostile forces on the outside don't accept it, well, sure, we understand that. We expect that. But sometimes when there's subversion from within, that's the problem. But don't be scandalized and don't be shocked if and when that happens. It's not if, it's just when. It has happened. It will happen. Don't be taken back by that. We are too easily shocked. We are too easily scandalized. You know, a fighter who's back on his heels all the time gets knocked out. Do not be constantly back on your heels, reeling because of, oh, how could that have happened? Grow up. You know, some bishops asked me one time, well, how can we make sure the scandals, things like that, never happen again? I said, ordain aardvarks. Or frogs, moose, bears, rabbits, anything but men. There is no way to absolutely guarantee that sin won't happen. Why? Because everybody's a sinner. So grow up, get over it, and be a good soldier. Don't be so easily scandalized, because it doesn't do us any good. One of the problems we have, and here's an analogy that I told you about, we take from the natural order and apply it to higher things. A fighter who's going backwards constantly, he's on his heels, he's afraid of the other guy, he gets knocked out. When you are nothing but defensive, reeling, going backwards, you get knocked on your butt. And that's the way we've been in many cases, too defensive, not offensive enough. I don't mean offensive, like in, an offensive person. I mean on the offense, The scandals were a horrible thing. We all regret that. It's awful. It happened. Some of our brothers did terrible things. We know that. You can't deny it. It happened. What they don't tell you is those things were 10 times more common in certain other professions. They don't tell you that because it doesn't make headlines. It's not good news. But when a priest does it, and it's bad, I'm not minimizing it, it's terrible. But they capitalize upon that because there's an inherent hatred for religion in the Western world now. There is an inherent hatred. If you don't believe that, you haven't been where I've been. If you think you're normal, you're crazy. You're not normal. You are a remnant. Gideon's army. On a relative basis, there aren't many of us. You know, they talk about, well, how many members do we have in the Catholic Church, say in the United States? And, you know, you hear the figure 60 million, 70 million, baloney. Those are nominal. You know, you might put it on the census report or something, your religion, Catholic. But if you haven't been to Mass for 30 years, you don't receive the sacraments, you don't believe what the church believes, you're not Catholic, in fact. And so, what's my guess? About 10% of that. Maybe 6 million. And the special forces troops, the elite forces, about 10% of that. The ones who pray the rosary every day, who go to adoration, who practice virtue when it isn't easy to practice virtue. Not that many on a relative basis. And so, you're elite troops, but you have to be trained. One of the most dangerous traps a person can fall in is the denial of reality. That's one of the most self-defeating things that you can engage in, to deny reality. And here's what I mean by that. You know, let's say you have a special forces unit in Afghanistan, and one of the men, you know, he's about to go on a mission. Well, you've got to go and do reconnaissance on this village to see if there's enemy activity. And he says, well, what for? There's no enemy. There's no war. Everybody is warm and fuzzy. They all love me. They don't want to hurt me. Are you goofy? What would I do with a man like that if I was his commanding officer? I'd remove him and put him in a padded place where he couldn't hurt himself or anybody else. Because if I put him next to my guys who are in harm's way and he doesn't acknowledge basic reality, he's not only a threat to himself, he's a threat to the guy on his left and his right. And it's no different for you and me. We are at war. And our battle is not against flesh and blood. Let me read to you from a passage that I've read a zillion times from St. Paul's letter to the Ephesians. Finally, be strong in the Lord and in the strength of his might. Put on the whole armor of God. Why would you put on armor if you're not in a battle? Well, you wouldn't. Put on the whole armor of God. Doesn't say put on some of the armor of God. Doesn't say put on 50% of the armor of God. Doesn't say put on most of the armor of God. It says put on the whole armor of God. What happens if you don't put on the whole armor of God? Well, you're not protected completely. The devil's a good shot. He'll take you out. He will take you out. So put on the whole armor of God, that you may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. Now, I started to say before, I don't have time to fiddle around arguing with people who don't believe what the Catholic Church believes. If some upstart theologian who just doesn't understand the faith tells you the devil doesn't exist, smile sweetly at him and walk away, because he doesn't know his faith. I don't care how many degrees he has. All kinds of people have been educated into imbecility. So it doesn't make a bit of difference. I'm all for education. I believe in education. I have 5 university degrees. I paid my dues. I earned most of them with highest honors. I know what the church teaches. There's good and evil. There's grace and sin. There's God and the enemy of God. We are at war, and St. Paul says, put on the whole armor of God that you may stand against the wiles of the devil. And he is a wily adversary. The very word Satan means the adversary. For we are not contending against flesh and blood. We're in hostile territory, but human beings are not the real enemy. But against principalities and powers. Those are choirs of angels. In this case, fallen angels, the demonic forces. There's no debate about that. I've had persons inside the church say, oh, I don't believe in the devil. Well, why would you brag about being a heretic? In plain English. You don't believe what the church believes. You know, we don't like to use those harsh terms anymore. We're too civilized. Yeah, we're too detached from reality, is what we are. What is heresy? It's an obstinate, now note all the words, they're important. Heresy is an obstinate, note the word obstinate, an obstinate post-baptismal denial of some element of faith or morals which must be believed with divine and Catholic faith, or an obstinate doubt, note the words, obstinate doubt. So either it's a denial or a doubt, even a doubt, concerning some element of faith or morals which must be accepted. Listen, there isn't anything in the Bible that says without understanding it is impossible to please God. What it says in there is without faith, it is impossible to please God. We walk by faith, not by sight. That's the word of God. What does that mean? It means we accept the church's teaching in faith and morals on faith. Faith. But I don't understand it. You don't have to. As a matter of fact, you can't. You only think you can. But I'll believe that. Somebody said to me once, if you could fully explain the Trinity to me, I'll become Catholic. I said, brother, if I could fully explain the Trinity to you, I'd be God and you could worship me. I would have to be God to explain God. Who can fathom God? God is infinite. By definition, right? God is infinite. God has given us a mind, an intelligence, and we should use it. However, our mind is finite. We're creatures. By definition, we're finite. So a finite mind can't fully comprehend the infinite God. That's an exercise in futility. You're doomed to failure. That does not mean that faith and reason are opposed. They are not. They are perfectly consistent. However, it is by faith that we walk. We proceed by faith. So when the church teaches something in faith and morals, our business is to accept it. Now, you have to know what that is. Part of your preparation, if you're going to go into battle, Soldiers have to be prepared. If you do not know the basics of your Catholic and Christian faith, you're unprepared. You are ill-prepared to meet a very, very wily adversary. And you're going to lose. Now, what we're concerned about here, yes, we're on a mission. We're in hostile territory. The mission's redemption. Hostile territory is the world, under the control of the prince of this world, as Jesus called him. He's a liar and the father of lies, a murderer from the beginning. So you have to know the nature of the enemy. If you're going to be a good soldier and fight the good fight, if you're going to survive in hostile territory, you must know the nature of the enemy. Well, let's see what else St. Paul has to say. Well, we're fighting against world rulers of the present age of darkness, against the spiritual hosts of wickedness in regions above. Therefore, take the whole armor of God. Once again, the whole armor of God. Don't leave something out. Part of that armor. Well, the doctrine of the faith, the moral teaching of the church. You know, somebody says, well, I accept all the 10 commandments, except one. Then what you do is you leave part of yourself unguarded, unprotected. And the devil will put an arrow right through the unprotected part. That is where you will be wounded. And you say, well, I think that I accept all the church's teaching except the teaching on abortion. Listen. In case you haven't heard it, and I know you have, but and some of you've heard it from me for years, but you cannot be pro-choice and Catholic. Forget it. Ain't happening. You cannot say that you are a good Catholic or any kind of a Catholic other than a dead Catholic. You're a dead soldier. You got a dead soldier laying out on the battlefield. What's he going to do? Is he going to take the bridge? Is he going to gather intelligence for you? Is he going to fight the good fight? No, he's dead. When you reject essential church teaching, and that's a big one, that's teaching on the 5th commandment, no one in their right mind, no one in their right mind could ever say that abortion is acceptable, not even under certain circumstances. Well, what about in cases of rape? Well, rape is a horrible thing. God help us, it's terrible. But will it be rectified by murder? No. Once the life is conceived, it is. God is the author of life. God decides when you begin to live and when you die. Once we start playing God, we're ill-equipped. Do not be confused about that. Don't let the enemy engage in psychological warfare against you. Psyops, they call it in the military. Don't allow the enemy to mess with your mind. If the devil takes your mind, you're dead meat. If you begin to think like him, he's won you over. Then it's arguable that you're on the other side. You're not part of the solution, you become part of the problem. I'll say it one more time in case there's any doubt, and I know there's not among you good people, but just so you're totally confirmed in it, and when you go back out there, which you're going to have to do, you're 100% confirmed in this. It is absolutely, unquestionably, irrefutably impossible to be pro-choice and Catholic. You can't do it. And if anybody else tells you different, especially inside the church, or does anything to encourage that pro-death mentality, know what you're dealing with. Don't be deterred. Don't be weak in the knees, soft in the spine. Be soft-hearted, not soft-headed. There's a difference. Be compassionate. I'm compassionate to all human weakness. I feel very sorry for people who get in a bad spot. But encouraging them to participate in what is tantamount to murder is not the solution to any problem. So be strong in that. We're contending against, remember this, the enemy is the devil. The enemy is the devil. St. Paul's clear. Our battle's not against flesh and blood. It seems like it sometimes. And yes, human beings do end up being pawns in the battle. You know, they do the devil's bidding. But they've been captured. And what do we have to do? What did Jesus come to do? He came to set the captives free. You know what the Special Forces motto is? It's in Latin, De oppresso liber, to free the oppressed. Kind of similar there. Jesus, Special Forces. To set the captives free, that's why he came. Special Forces motto, to free the oppressed. See, we have that mission. So when you see someone, whether it's the lowest person, a street person, unemployed, on drugs, homeless, helpless, whether you see him and he's living a bad life, all the way up to the President of the United States, anybody, and you see that they're not living or thinking or acting in a way consistent with objective truth and goodness, don't take them as the enemy. Our battle's not against flesh and blood. Our battle is against spiritual forces. You have to know these things. This is basic. Don't be sidetracked. All right. Therefore, take the whole armor of God that you may be able to withstand in the evil day. And having done all that, to stand. Now, I'm going to point something out to you. The verb stand here is used several times in succession. I'll use another analogy now. St. Paul's talking about spiritual warfare here. He's talking about spiritual survival here. Fighting the good fight. You can't stand unless you have a spine in the natural order. You are not going to physically stand if you have no spine. And you're not going to morally and spiritually stand up straight unless you have a spine. You better have a moral backbone. You better have a spiritual spine, or you can't stand, you'll fall. Why has the United States of America and every other Western country fallen from prominence? Why have we've begun to lose our standing in the world? Why? The moral demise of a nation always precedes the ultimate demise of a nation. Read history if you don't believe it. The moral unraveling of a nation, and I submit to you that's what we have today, the moral unraveling of a nation leads to the ultimate unraveling of the nation. You don't believe it? Read the headlines. Look what's happening economically. It's a disaster, and it will get worse. Oh, how can you say that? I've been saying it for 20 years, and I have not been wrong. It has gone from bad to worse, and yet will get worse. The disaster in the Gulf. Do you have any idea how bad that really is? It's an unprecedented disaster. nothing will go right until we're right with God. Nothing will go right until we're right with God. We will become weaker and weaker and weaker economically, militarily, socially, in every way conceivable. And upstart, pipsqueak countries, rogue nations like North Korea and Iran will spit in our eye. They know we don't have the money or the will to sustain a conflict. Our position is getting weaker and weaker and weaker because our moral and spiritual life, one person at a time, has gotten weaker and weaker and weaker. And the ultimate end of that weakness is defeat. The vaporization of freedom, of our way of life. Survival is relevant. At a certain point in time, survival becomes the only thing. It's not going to make a bit of difference what kind of car you drive, how big your house is, what your job is, your salary, your benefits. Doesn't mean a thing. It pales into utter insignificance when cast in the pure light of reality. Jesus said to the Jews who had believed in him, "If you continue in my word, you are truly my disciples, then you will know the truth. And the truth will make you free." Jesus came to set the captives free. Let me read to you the Special Forces prayer. Yeah, imagine that. The Special Forces has a prayer. Let me tell you something. If you're in some of the places they are, you'd be praying. See, it's right on the Special Forces Handbook. See that? Right on the back of it, Special Forces Prayer. Wow, in the United States of America, where God's been evicted from the public sphere, where the author of existence has been thrown out, where you can't mention God in public places, the Ten Commandments, you can't say a prayer in a public prayer. Well, Special Forces, they have a prayer. Almighty God, who art the author of liberty, freedom, and the champion of the oppressed. Now, I want you to remember, put yourself in here. You are one of God's special operations soldiers. This is your prayer. All you have to do is adjust it for spiritual things. Almighty God, still the same God that we're praying to, only one God. You are the author of liberty and the champion of the oppressed. Who's the oppressed? Every one of us. Every one of us that's caught in the battlefield of life, that has to fight the good fight and is in danger. You know, the church says that the story of human existence is the account of combat, dour combat they call it, dour combat with the forces of evil. That's right out of the Catechism of the Catholic Church, which quotes another major document in church history. The story of human existence is the account of dour combat with the forces of evil. I didn't make that up, folks. That's the church's admonition, the church's assertion. We, the men and women of the Special Forces, acknowledge our dependence upon Thee, O Lord, in the preservation of human freedom. Now remember, just when you're thinking, just translate this from the physical order of warfare to the spiritual, because it's the same. The analogy works. Go with us, O Lord, as we seek to defend the defenseless and to free the enslaved. May we ever remember that our nation, all of humanity, whose motto is in God we trust, expects that we shall acquit ourselves with honor, and that we may never bring shame upon our faith, our families, or our fellow men. Grant us wisdom from thy mind, courage from thy heart, strength from thine arm, and protection by thy divine hand. It is for thee that we do battle, O Lord, and to thee belongs the victor's crown, for thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. Amen. That is the Special Forces prayer. That's the prayer of the United States Army Special Forces. It's a pretty good prayer. We are at war. Our battle, not against flesh and blood. If you don't believe that, you are in a perilous place. You are behind enemy lines with no belief that the enemy exists. What will happen is that the enemy will take you out without resistance. You have a mission. I have a mission. The mission is redemption, the same mission as Jesus, the Redeemer. Don't deny reality. There is a battle. There is good, there is evil, there is truth, there are lies. There's life and there is death. Therefore, choose life. Go the right way. Fight the good fight. Don't deny these realities. Life really is a war. What I'm going to do in the second talk is I'm going to go into the acronym that the Army uses for survival. You know, an acronym where you take the word, survival, and then you take the letters in that word, like S, first letter in the word survival, and then you have a reality, and they go through all that to help you remember how to survive. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to take that word survival, and then I'm going to translate it into spiritual survival and what you have to do in order to survive. But there's some basic things. I'm not reinventing the wheel here. You may not have heard anybody else quite do it this way, but that's okay. Sometimes you have to hear things or see things from multiple perspectives in order to gain full perspective on that reality. So I'm trying to present this to you in a way that's easily understandable. You know, if I got up here and talked in fancy theological terms and sounded eloquent and wonderful, you might say, "Oh, doesn't Father speak wonderfully?" And then, you know, some old farmer would say, "Yeah, well, what did he say?" and it doesn't do you any good unless you understand what I'm talking about, and that's what I've always tried to do. A teacher is useless if they cannot convey to every student what it is they're trying to convey. You know, if you obscure the message with incomprehensible language and presentation, you're not a good teacher. A teacher's job is to convey the material to the students in an uncluttered manner. You want to convey it intelligibly. Let me tell you who doesn't do that. Something I've seen in the church in the last 25 years that I've been pretty active in the church. They will take pure intelligibility, that's God by definition. God is pure light. God is truth itself. And some of these so-called teachers, theologians, whatever, they will take pure intelligibility, God, the doctrine of the faith, and they will nuance it into utter ambiguity. I'll say that again. Here's what a bad teacher does. Here's what an anti-teacher does. Takes pure intelligibility and nuances it, twists it, torques it, distorts it into utter ambiguity so that you don't have a clue what he's talking about. You know, you can do that with the sacraments. What is a sacrament? and then they give an explanation. You sit there and you have a dull headache when it's over. Your vision is clouded. You wish you were someplace else, and you don't know any more at the end than you did at the beginning. Not a good teacher. But if the teacher gives you that reality in a simple way that's intelligible, that the light bulb goes on and you say, aha! So that's what whatever it is, sacrament. What's a sacrament? A sense-perceptible sign which effects what it signifies, and then a little bit of explanation, and it's easy, you've got it. Grace, sanctifying grace, what's that? A share in divine life. Wow, rocket science. Well, it's a very high truth, but you have to be able to take those very high truths and present them in an intelligible fashion. You do not do the troops any good. You don't do your children any good, your grandchildren, your friends. You don't do them any good unless they can understand what you're talking about. Now, that's why very often the most eloquent sermon is an action. A picture worth 1,000 words, that saying, right? There was a British journalist, Malcolm Muggeridge, who had struggled intellectually with the faith for some time, studied the Catholic faith, couldn't quite come to it. One day he met Mother Teresa. The light bulb went on. So that's what a Catholic is. He became Catholic. See, that's an example of what you have to do. But if you don't even know what it means to be Catholic, and a lot of Catholics don't have a clue, by the way, I think you do, but a lot of them don't, how are we going to convey that to them? Well, the best way we can, by our example. By words too, but by our example. So life is a war. There's some basic things that you have to know for survival. In the military, they have survival courses. They'll send you to a survival school. Pilots all get survival training. There are basic things you have to know in order to survive in a physical war and in a spiritual war. And if you ignore these things, you ignore them to your own peril. Now, there are a lot of people who don't like to think this way because it's uncomfortable. And I admit that everyone has value in the church. Some people are more adept at talking about warm, fuzzy things. I'm not good at warm, fuzzy things. Therefore, I don't do warm, fuzzy. I do cold, hard reality. Foot to butt. It's basic. It's very, very basic. Okay. 4 things we're going to come back to over and over and over and over again. What we believe. Now, what I'm giving you here is the basic structure of the Catechism of the Catholic Church. Now, I know you know this, but I have to say it. Every one of you should certainly have a Bible. I know you have a Bible, and that first and foremost. But if you don't understand what it says, if you can quote chapter and verse incessantly but don't have a clue to what it means, it's of limited value. The Catechism of the Catholic Church is a gift that we have in the Catholic Church that helps us understand divine revelation. That's part of your survival training. In the natural order, if a soldier is caught behind enemy lines in a hostile environment, he could be caught in the desert in Iraq. He could be caught out in the arid mountains of Afghanistan. He could be caught in the jungles of Vietnam, as some were in my lifetime. You have to know something about that environment. And they teach you this in survival school. You've got to know something about the environment in which we operate. You have to know something about that environment, which is a hostile environment. We're caught behind enemy lines, in a manner of speaking. You must know the nature of the environment, the nature of the enemy, in order to survive. And that's what we're going to do here. So you got to know what we believe. Creed. You have to know, that's the first section of the Catechism. You've got to know what we believe in the Catholic Church. How are you going to know it or live it if you don't know it? And I submit to you that a vast number of Catholics don't know their faith. I know this for a fact. When I started, right after I was ordained, even before I was ordained, when I was a deacon, whenever I would do a parish mission or talk to people, at the end, I gave them a simple, very simple catechetical test. I mean, I typed it out, ran off copies, had the ushers lock the doors, and nobody got out until they took the test. Then I collected up the papers. Now let me tell you something. If you're a teacher and if you're involved with education and if you think you can assess whether or not your students have gotten the material and understand it without testing them, your brain isn't working properly. There's only one way to find out if they know the material. You must test them. Well, so if I gave a simple 10-question quiz, which I did for years, at the end of every mission, conference, and no trick questions. What are the 10 commandments? You know, we could do it right now. I'll just look around here for a guilty face. You thought it was good sitting in the front, huh? I can see you. Well, if I said, okay, what are the 10 commandments? And you say, oh, well, do I have to get them in order? Yeah. What are the 7 sacraments? What is a sacrament? What are the 7 petitions of the Our Father? Give a brief explanation. What is sanctifying grace? What is an angel? Describe or define purgatory. These are simple questions that I would expect any child preparing for First Holy Communion would know this. What are the 7 sacraments? You know, a 7-year-old child in the Catholic Church ought to know that. Unlike what I found that after 12 years of education in the Catholic school, more than half of them didn't have a clue. You say, how'd that happen? Your guess is as good as mine. They weren't taught. Just like in mathematics, if you're teaching, 5th grade math, you have to have a body of knowledge you're responsible for, right? The teacher, it would be unfair to the teacher to say, oh, well, just teach whatever you want. No, you're responsible to teach this knowledge. And how do you know at the end if the teacher was good and if the students, well, I'll tell you how I would know if the teacher's good. The students got it. The kid with the most difficult time understanding, if he got it, that teacher's pretty good. That teacher did the job, conveyed that truth to the kid. So, you got to learn the basics. You have to learn what the church believes. If somebody of from another faith asks you, well, what does the Catholic Church believe about this and this and this? And your best answer is, duh. That doesn't do us much good. 2, the sacraments. What is a sacrament? What do they do? What are the 7 sacraments? What are the sacraments of initiation? What are the sacraments of healing? What are the sacraments of service? Boom, boom, boom. You should get it. Because at some point, your survival might depend on it. You know, training comes back to you. You want to be able to act reflexively in a tough spot. You're caught behind enemy lines. You're injured. They're hunting you like an animal. Will you panic or will you survive? The Ten Commandments, you've got to know that, what they mean. And prayer, the 4 parts of the Catechism of the Catholic Church. Creed, commandments, sacraments, prayer. That's basically how the church divides her teaching, those 4 major categories. You have to have the knowledge. You have to have survival knowledge. That's not everything, but you have to have the knowledge to have a fighting chance. You have to acknowledge spiritual reality. Then I want you to think, if you were, say, caught in the mountains of Afghanistan, you're alone, behind enemy lines. Say your plane went down, you're a pilot. How will you survive? I'm going to talk later on this afternoon about unconventional warfare and apply it to the situation we have today in the world. One of the elements of unconventional warfare, of guerrilla warfare, is escape and evasion. You're caught behind enemy lines, you've got to survive, you've got to know how to escape or evade capture, evade the enemy. I remember one of my spiritual directors once when I was first starting out. And he said to me, I want you to become so little the devil can't see you. Evasion. That's humility. Become so little the devil can't see you anymore, and if he can't see you, he can't catch you. Evasion. Evade the enemy. You're caught behind enemy lines. He's hunting you. You got to know evasion, escape and evasion. It's essential. We'll talk about that some more. In the next couple of presentations, I'm going to present the acronym that we use, that the military uses, and that I'm going to apply to this spiritual survival course. Take the letters, S-U-R-V-I-V-A-L, survival. S, size up the situation. Size up the situation. Know where you are. Are you injured? You know, your plane goes down, your unit is caught behind enemy lines. Assess the situation. Size up the situation. Undue haste makes waste. I wonder what that could mean for spiritual survival. Have you ever noticed that people run like crazy people today? Frenetic activity, rapid succession of sounds and sights, television, thousands of images in rapid succession. They speed up your brain. It's hard to pray. You can't settle down. Undue haste makes waste. Remember where you are. You are caught behind enemy lines. You're on a battlefield. Failure to remember where you are is hazardous to your health, your spiritual health. Vanquish fear and panic. I think sometimes we don't like to think about these things. You know, I think priests sometimes, and I sympathize with all priests, they don't want to talk about these things because people don't like it. Well, I'm sure nobody likes to hear in the military about getting captured and what can happen to you if you're captured. But they better hear about it, and they better know about it, and they better act accordingly. Value, or improvise. Improvise. You know, adapt and improvise. Oh, but the diocese won't teach the catechism, or they won't do that. And oh, cut it out, man, do it yourself. Improvise. You got a brain? Improvise. Then have it at your home and gather a few people and watch my series on the catechism. That's one way to do it, right? All right? B, value living. Value living. Have the will to live. A, act like the natives. Who's the natives for our purposes? The saints. They knew how to do it. L, learn basic survival skills, and so forth. We're going to go into these things in more detail. You've got to know how to survive in order to survive. Don't wait until the catastrophe happens to try to learn it then. It's too late. You've got to be able to respond reflexively. Your training kicks in, and you survive. You have to do this. A failure to do this, not only do you let yourself down, but you let others down. You know, why do we do this? You know, in the Special Forces, I have a friend who's a retired general. He's going to be inducted into the Ranger Hall of Fame and the Special Forces Hall of Fame. John Wayne played him in the movie, The Green Berets. He was the commanding officer of Mike Force in Vietnam. For the man at my left and my right. Why do I do that? Why do I survive? Why do I fight? For those at my left and my right. Because their survival might depend upon my survival. You have a mission. Let's accomplish the mission. God bless you.